The blood on Katherine Dawson's hands had long since dried, but the accusation still clung to her like Wyoming dust in August, impossible to shake no matter how hard she tried. She stood at the edge of Sonora's Main Street in 1878, watching potential employers cross to the other side when they saw her coming, their whispers carrying on the wind like tumbleweeds rolling through her last shred of hope. It had been 6 months since the trial, 6 months since the jury declared her innocent of poisoning her employer's wife. But innocence in the eyes of the law meant nothing when guilt had already been decided in the court of public opinion. The fact that the woman had died from consumption, as 3 separate doctors had testified, mattered little when people wanted someone to blame. Katherine had been the housekeeper, the stranger from back east who had come west seeking a fresh start, and that made her an easy target. Now, at 24 years old, with her savings nearly depleted and her reputation in tatters, Katherine found herself standing outside the general store with the last of her coins clutched in her palm, trying to decide whether to buy bread or save the money for another week's rent at the boarding house. The choice was taken from her when she saw the notice board and the small, weather-beaten advertisement that had been there so long the edges had started to curl. Housekeeper wanted. Cooking and childcare, room and board plus wages. Inquire at the Patterson Ranch, 5 miles north of town. She had seen it before, had heard the other women at the boarding house talking about it with barely concealed contempt. Cooper Patterson was a widower with 2 daughters, and he had been through 7 housekeepers in 2 years. The last woman had lasted only 3 days before fleeing back to town with wild tales of disobedient children and impossible conditions. No respectable woman would work there now, not when there were other options available, but Katherine had no other options. She spent her last coins on a loaf of bread and a small piece of cheese, then began the long walk north as the afternoon sun beat down on her shoulders. The road was dusty and rutted from wagon wheels, lined with sagebrush and the occasional cottonwood tree. In the distance, the mountains rose up like sentinels, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. The Patterson Ranch came into view as she crested a small rise, and Katherine paused to take it in. The main house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The wood had weathered to a soft gray, and several of the shutters hung at odd angles, but it was still standing proud. Behind it stood a barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved lazily in the heat. Cattle dotted the hillsides, brown and white shapes against the golden grass. As she approached the house, Katherine heard voices, high-pitched and arguing. She hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, unsure whether to knock or announce herself, when the front door flew open and a girl of about 10 came charging out, her dark braids flying behind her. "I do not care what you think, Emma. Papa said I could name the new calf, and I am naming her Buttercup whether you like it or not." A second girl, perhaps 8 years old, appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. "Buttercup is a stupid name. That calf is going to be a working cow, not a pet." "Everything does not have to be about work. You sound just like old Mrs. Henderson, and she was mean and awful." Katherine cleared her throat softly, and both girls froze, their eyes going wide as they noticed her for the first time. They stared at her with identical expressions of surprise, their faces smudged with what looked like flour, and their dresses rumpled and stained. "I apologize for interrupting," Katherine said, keeping her voice gentle. "I am looking for Mr. Patterson. I saw the advertisement in town for a housekeeper." The older girl, the one with the braids, moved to the porch railing and looked down at Katherine with undisguised curiosity. "Are you really here about the job?" "I am." "What is your name, Katherine Dawson?" The younger girl, Emma, gasped and grabbed her sister's arm. "Lily, that is the woman everyone says is a murderer." Katherine felt her stomach drop, felt the familiar weight of shame and anger settle on her shoulders. She should have known word would have reached even out here. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain once again that she had been acquitted, that the accusations were false, but Lily spoke first. "Emma, that is rude." The older girl turned back to Katherine, her brown eyes serious. "Are you a murderer?" "No," Katherine said firmly. "I was accused, but I was found innocent. The woman I cared for died of consumption, a disease of the lungs. I had nothing to do with it." Lily nodded slowly, as if considering this information carefully. "That makes sense. Consumption killed our mama too. It is a terrible sickness." "I am very sorry for your loss," Katherine said, and she meant it. She knew that grief, had seen it in the eyes of the man who had lost his wife, and then turned his pain into accusations against Katherine. Emma was still hiding partially behind her sister, but she peeked around to study Katherine more closely. "Are you going to run away like all the others?" "I have not even been hired yet," Katherine pointed out. "But if I am, I do not run from challenges." "The last lady cried," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She said we were demons sent to torment her." "Mrs. Henderson was a prune-faced old goat," Lily added. "She tried to make us sit still for 4 hours doing needlework. 4 hours. Papa finally sent her away when he came home and found us tied to our chairs." Katherine blinked. "She tied you to your chairs." "Only because we kept getting up," Emma said, though she had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "But still, that seems like something a mean person would do." Before Katherine could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention to the road. A man was riding toward the house at a steady trot, sitting tall in the saddle with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. Even from a distance, Katherine could see he was broad-shouldered and sun-bronzed, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "Papa is home," Emma said, and both girls ran down the steps to meet him. Cooper Patterson dismounted in one smooth motion, and his daughters immediately began talking over each other, gesturing toward Katherine and explaining her presence. He listened with apparent patience, though Katherine saw his jaw tighten slightly when Lily mentioned the murder accusations. He handed the reins to Lily with a quiet instruction to take care of his horse, then walked toward the porch where Katherine waited. As he drew closer, she could make out his features more clearly. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that could have come from squinting at distant horizons or from laughter, though Katherine suspected it had been a while since he had done much of the latter. He was handsome in a rugged, practical way, though he looked tired and worn thin by the weight of running a ranch and raising 2 daughters alone. "Mr. Patterson," Katherine said, straightening her spine and meeting his gaze directly. "My name is Katherine Dawson, and I am here about the housekeeper position." He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, close enough now that she could see the dust on his boots and the way his shirt stuck to his back with sweat. "I know who you are, Miss Dawson. News travels even out here." "Then you know I was acquitted," she said, refusing to look away even as her heart hammered in her chest. "You know that 3 doctors testified on my behalf, that there was no evidence of wrongdoing." "I know what the jury decided," he said carefully. "I also know that you will not find work anywhere else in this territory, regardless of what the jury said." "That is correct." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "The work here is hard. My daughters are good girls, but they are spirited, and they have run off every housekeeper I have hired." The last woman lasted 3 days. The one before that made it a week. I need someone who can cook, clean, teach the girls their letters and numbers, and help manage the household while I run the ranch. The pay is $15 a month plus room and board. You will have your own room on the second floor, and Sundays are your own after morning chores are done. That sounds fair, Katherine said. I am offering you the job, Miss Dawson, but I need to be clear about something. He glanced back at his daughters, who were supposed to be tending to his horse but were clearly eavesdropping from the barn door. Those girls are the most important thing in my life. If I have even the slightest concern about their safety or well-being, you will be gone before you can pack your bag. Do you understand? Perfectly, Katherine said. And I would expect nothing less from a good father. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, and he nodded. When can you start? Immediately, if that suits you. It does. He started up the steps, then paused beside her. Up close, she could smell horse and leather and sweat, the honest sense of hard work. My daughters seem to like you. That is unusual. They despised Mrs. Henderson on sight. Perhaps they have good instincts, Katherine said quietly. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. Perhaps they do. Come inside and I will show you your room. Girls, stop pretending to work and get in here. Lily and Emma came running, their faces bright with barely contained excitement. As Katherine followed Cooper Patterson into the house, she felt the younger girl slip a small hand into hers, warm and trusting. Something tight in her chest loosened slightly, the first real breath she had taken in 6 months. The interior of the house was spacious, but clearly suffered from the lack of a woman's touch. The furniture was well made but covered in dust, and dirty dishes were stacked on every available surface in the kitchen. Books and papers were scattered across tables, and muddy boot prints tracked across the wooden floors. Through an open doorway, Katherine could see a parlor with a cold fireplace and windows so dirty they barely let in light. I apologize for the state of things, Cooper said, following her gaze. We have been without proper help for nearly a month now. It is nothing that cannot be fixed with time and effort, Katherine said diplomatically, though privately she was already making a list of everything that needed to be done. He led her upstairs, where a narrow hallway connected 4 bedrooms. The girls share the room at the end. Mine is there. This one is yours. He pushed open a door to reveal a small but clean room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch. The previous housekeepers did not do much, but they at least kept this room tidy. It is perfect, Katherine said, and she meant it. After weeks of sharing a crowded boarding house room with 2 other women, the idea of having her own space felt like a luxury. Good. I will have the girls help you bring up your things. Where are your bags? Katherine felt her cheeks warm. I walked from town. Everything I own is in my carpet bag at the boarding house. He was quiet for a moment, and she braced herself for questions or judgment, but he simply nodded. I will drive you back in the wagon tomorrow to collect your things and settle your bill. For tonight, I am sure we can find you something to wear. Emma, show Miss Dawson where we keep the clean linens. The little girl stepped forward eagerly. Are you really going to stay? If your father will have me, yes. Emma's face split into a wide grin. Finally. Someone who does not look like they just bit into a lemon. Come on, Miss Dawson. I will show you everything. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. Katherine found a simple cotton dress that had belonged to Cooper's late wife, carefully altered it to fit well enough for the moment, and set about trying to restore some order to the kitchen. The girls helped, though their idea of helping often created more work than it saved. Still, Katherine found herself charmed by their enthusiasm and their endless chatter. She learned that Lily was 10 and Emma was 8. that their mother had died 2 years ago from consumption, and that they missed her terribly but tried not to talk about it too much because it made their papa sad. She learned that they loved the ranch, loved helping with the animals, and hated sitting still for needlework or any other lady lessons that the previous housekeepers had tried to force on them. "Papa says we need to learn to be proper ladies," Lily confided as she dried dishes that Katherine washed. "But I do not see why. We live on a ranch, not in a fancy city." "There is nothing wrong with knowing how to run a household," Katherine said carefully. "But I think there are many ways to be a lady. Being kind and smart and capable seems more important than knowing which fork to use at a fancy dinner." Lily's eyes lit up. "That is exactly what I think. Oh, Miss Dawson, I think we are going to get along just fine." By the time Katherine finally tumbled into bed that night, exhausted to her bones, the kitchen was clean, the dishes were washed, and she had a better sense of the household's routines. Cooper had been polite but distant, spending most of the evening in his office working on ranch accounts. The few times their paths had crossed, he had been courteous, thanking her for her efforts but maintaining a careful distance. Katherine understood. He was a widower hiring a woman with a scandalous past to care for his children. Of course, he would be cautious. She would have to prove herself, would have to show him that she was trustworthy and capable. It would take time, but time was something she had in abundance now. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. She dressed quickly in the borrowed dress, pinned up her dark hair, and made her way downstairs to find Cooper already in the kitchen, building up the fire in the stove. "You are up early," he said, glancing at her in surprise. "Habit," Katherine replied. "In my previous positions, I was always the first one up. The girls will not be awake for another hour at least. I usually just have coffee and biscuits before heading out to the morning chores." "Then let me make you a proper breakfast," Katherine said, moving past him to survey the pantry. She found eggs, bacon, flour, and a jar of preserved peaches. "It will not take long." He looked like he wanted to protest, but instead he just nodded and moved to the table, pulling over a ledger he had apparently been working on. Katherine set to work, the familiar motions soothing after so many weeks of uncertainty. She fried bacon until it was crispy, scrambled eggs with a bit of cream, and made biscuits that came out of the oven golden and fluffy. When she set the plate in front of Cooper, he stared at it like he had forgotten what real food looked like. "Miss Dawson, you did not have to go to all this trouble." "It was no trouble," she said, pouring him fresh coffee. "And please, if you are going to be working all day, you need more than biscuits." He took a bite and closed his eyes, and Katherine felt a small surge of satisfaction. When he opened them again, there was something softer in his expression. "That is the best meal I have had in months. Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, and Katherine found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. There was something solid and steady about Cooper Patterson, something that spoke of a man who kept his promises and did what needed to be done. His hands were calloused and scarred from ranch work, but he held his fork with surprising grace. When he caught her looking, she quickly glanced away, focusing intently on her own plate. "About today," he said, pushing back from the table. "I need to ride out to check on the cattle in the north pasture, but I should be back by noon. Will you be all right here with the girls?" "Of course. I thought I would start on the laundry and do some more cleaning, perhaps work with Lily and Emma on their letters if they are willing." "Good luck with that," he said with the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "They are more likely to talk you into letting them run wild." "Then I will simply have to be cleverer than they are," Katherine said. His smile widened. I think you might be at that. After he left, Catherine heard stirring upstairs and went to wake the girls properly. She found them already up, sitting on Emma's bed and whispering together. They fell silent when she entered, looking guilty. "What are you two plotting?" Catherine asked, crossing her arms but keeping her tone light. "Nothing," Lily said too quickly. "We were just talking about how glad we are that you are here," Emma added, which was clearly true but also clearly not the whole story. "Well, I am glad to be here too. Now, let us get you dressed and fed, and then we have work to do." The morning passed quickly. Catherine discovered that the girls were not lazy or undisciplined, they were simply bored and understimulated. When she made the washing into a game, timing them to see how fast they could hang sheets on the line, they threw themselves into it with enthusiasm. When she sat them down for lessons, she quickly abandoned the traditional primers and instead had them write letters to imaginary friends, describing life on the ranch. "You are much more fun than Mrs. Henderson," Emma declared over lunch. "She made us copy Bible verses for 3 hours." "Bible verses have their place," Catherine said. "But so does imagination and play. You are only children once." "That is what Mama used to say," Lily said softly. "She said we should learn everything we could but also remember to notice the beautiful things around us." "Your Mama sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Lily agreed. "We miss her very much." "Of course you do. That is natural and right, but I hope you know that missing her does not mean you cannot also be happy again." Both girls were quiet for a moment, and Catherine worried she had overstepped. But then Emma reached over and squeezed her hand. "I think Mama would have liked you, Miss Dawson." The words hit Catherine harder than she expected, bringing tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. "That is one of the kindest things anyone has ever said to me." That afternoon, Cooper returned with the wagon, and he and Catherine made the trip back to town. The ride was awkward at first, both of them clearly unsure what to talk about. Catherine stared at the landscape, watching the way the sunlight turned the grass to gold and the mountains rose up like promises in the distance. "Can I ask you something?" Cooper said finally, breaking the silence. "Of course." "Why did you come west? You have an education, you speak well." "You could have found work back east, even after the accusations." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, trying to decide how much to tell him. Finally, she said, "I came west for the same reason many people do. I wanted a fresh start, a place where my past did not matter. I was raised in an orphanage in Boston, educated by charity, and I spent my entire life being grateful for other people's kindness. When I finally had the means to leave, I wanted to go somewhere big and open, where I could be more than just the grateful orphan girl." She laughed bitterly. "It did not quite work out the way I planned." "No," Cooper said, "I suppose it did not. But maybe you are getting your fresh start now, just delayed." "Maybe," Catherine agreed. "What about you? Were you born here, Illinois, originally?" "My father was a farmer, but the land was played out and he lost everything in the panic of '73. I came west with my wife 5 years ago, bought this land cheap, and built it into something. It has not been easy, but it is ours. Or it was ours. Now it is mine and the girls." "You must miss her," Catherine said softly. "Every day," he admitted. "But life goes on. The ranch does not stop needing work. The girls do not stop needing a father. You do what you have to do." They arrived in town just as the afternoon heat was reaching its peak. Catherine directed Cooper to the boarding house, where Mrs. Miller, the proprietor, greeted her with obvious surprise. "Miss Dawson, I was not expecting you back. Have you found a position then?" "I have. I am working at the Patterson Ranch." Mrs. Miller's eyebrows shot up. "The Patterson Ranch? My goodness. Well, I hope you last longer than the others." Catherine ignored the implied insult and went upstairs to collect her things. Everything she owned fit into one carpet bag and a small trunk, a depressing reminder of how little she had to show for 24 years of life. When she came back down, Cooper was waiting by the wagon, and his expression darkened when he saw how few possessions she had. He helped her load the trunk without comment, but as they drove out of town, he said, "The girls mentioned you do not have many dresses. My wife's things are still packed away in the attic. You are welcome to them if they fit. No sense in them going to waste." "That is very generous, but I could not," Katherine started to say. "Please," Cooper interrupted. "Sarah would have wanted her things to be used. She was practical that way. And honestly, it would be good to see them worn again instead of just sitting in a trunk gathering dust." Katherine swallowed hard. "If you are certain, then I accept. Thank you." When they arrived back at the ranch, the girls came running out to greet them, and Lily immediately grabbed Katherine's arm. "Papa, Papa, we have been thinking, and we have something important to discuss with you. Can it wait until after I get Miss Dawson's things inside?" Cooper asked, but his tone was indulgent. "No, it is very important and it cannot wait," Emma insisted. Cooper sighed and set down the trunk. "All right then. What is so urgent?" The two girls exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Lily straightened her shoulders and said, "We have decided that Miss Dawson should be our new mother." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Katherine felt her face go hot, and she could not bring herself to look at Cooper. Her mind raced, trying to figure out how to respond, how to let the girls down gently while also not overstepping with their father. "Girls," Cooper said, and his voice was tight, "that is not something you can just decide. Miss Dawson is your housekeeper, not your mother." "But we like her," Emma said, her lower lip trembling. "And she is nice, and she does not make us sit still for hours, and she tells us stories, and she makes good food, and we think Mama would approve." "You cannot know what your Mama would approve," Cooper said, and now there was an edge of pain in his voice. "And you certainly cannot just pick someone to replace her like you are choosing a new calf." "We are not trying to replace Mama," Lily said, and tears were starting to stream down her face. "We could never replace her. But we need someone, Papa. We need a mother. You are so busy with the ranch, and you are sad all the time, and we thought maybe if Miss Dawson was our mother, then we could all be a family again." Katherine felt her heart breaking for these two little girls who had lost so much and were trying so hard to fix something that they should never have had to worry about. She knelt down so she was at eye level with them. "Lily, Emma, I am honored that you think so highly of me, truly. But marriage is not something that happens because children wish for it. Your father and I barely know each other. We are not in love. But you could be," Emma said stubbornly. "You could fall in love if you tried." "That is not how love works, sweetheart," Katherine said gently. "It is not something you can force or plan. It happens naturally or it does not happen at all." Cooper cleared his throat. "Girls, I appreciate that you want Miss Dawson to stay, and she is staying as your housekeeper, but the matter of marriage is not something for children to decide. Do you understand?" Both girls nodded, though they still looked mutinous. "Yes, Papa," they said in unison. "Good. Now go help Miss Dawson unpack while I tend to the horses." The girls trudged inside, their earlier excitement deflated, and Katherine started to follow them. But Cooper caught her arm gently. "Miss Dawson, I apologize for that. They should not have put you in such an awkward position." "They are children," Katherine said. "Children who have been through loss and are trying to make sense of the world. I am not offended. Still, I do not want you to feel uncomfortable here. You are the housekeeper, nothing more is expected of you." "I understand," Katherine said, though something in his tone made her chest feel tight. Was he trying to reassure her, or was he making it clear that he would never consider her as anything more? And why did she even care? She had known the man for less than a day. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine rose before dawn to make breakfast, and she and Cooper would share a quiet meal together before he headed out for the day's work. The girls would wake, and Katherine would feed them and then balance lessons with chores and play. She discovered that Lily had a talent for drawing and Emma could memorize poems after hearing them just once. In the afternoons, she would clean and cook, mend clothes and tend the kitchen garden that had been neglected for too long. Cooper came in each evening dusty and exhausted, and Katherine made sure there was always a hot meal waiting. They would eat together, the four of them, and Katherine found herself looking forward to these evenings. The girls would chatter about their day, Cooper would share news from the ranch, and slowly, carefully, they were becoming something like a family. But Katherine was acutely aware that she was the outsider, the hired help. Cooper was always polite, always respectful, but he maintained a careful distance. He did not seek her out for conversation beyond what was necessary. He did not linger after meals. He treated her with the same courtesy he might show any employee, nothing more. It should not have bothered her. She had not come here looking for romance. She had come looking for a job, for safety, for a place to belong. And yet, she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. She noticed the way his face softened when he looked at his daughters. She saw how hard he worked, how he never complained even when he came in with new bruises or cuts from the day's labor. She appreciated his quiet strength, his dedication, his fundamental decency. She was falling for Cooper Patterson, and it was the most inconvenient thing that could possibly happen. One evening about a month after her arrival, Katherine was in the kitchen finishing the dishes when Cooper came in from a late meeting with his ranch hands. He looked troubled, and when she asked if everything was all right, he hesitated. "There has been some trouble," he finally said. "Cattle rustling in the area. Several ranchers have lost stock in the past few weeks. I am going to need to post guards at night, which means less sleep and more work for everyone." "Is it dangerous?" Katherine asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "It could be. Rustlers are not usually violent if they are not confronted, but if they are caught in the act, things could turn bad." He met her eyes. "I want you to keep the girls inside after dark and make sure all the doors and windows are locked. If anything happens, if you hear gunshots or anything unusual, I want you to take the girls and hide in the root cellar. Do you understand?" "Yes," Katherine said, though fear was coiling in her stomach. "But what about you?" "I can take care of myself," he said. "My priority is keeping you and the girls safe." Over the next week, tension hung over the ranch like storm clouds. Cooper was gone more and more, riding the property with his men, sleeping in shifts in the barn. Katherine found herself constantly worried, listening for sounds in the night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. The girls sensed the tension, and they became clingy and nervous. Emma started having nightmares, and Lily grew quiet and withdrawn. Katherine did her best to keep them calm, to maintain routines, but it was hard when she was fighting her own fears. Then one night, everything came to a head. Katherine was reading to the girls in their room, trying to settle them for sleep, when she heard shouting from outside. Then came the sharp crack of gunfire, and the girls screamed. "Into the root cellar now," Katherine said, keeping her voice as calm as she could manage. "Just like your papa said. Come on, quickly." She grabbed both girls by the hands and pulled them down the stairs and through the kitchen. The root cellar was accessed through a trapdoor in the pantry floor, and Katherine had to wrestle with the heavy door while the girls clung to her skirts. More gunshots rang out, closer now, and she heard men shouting. Finally, she got the door open and practically pushed the girls down the ladder. She followed, pulling the door shut above them and plunging them into darkness. Emma was crying, and Lily was trying to be brave, but Katherine could feel her trembling. She pulled both girls close, holding them tight. "It is going to be all right," she whispered, even as her own heart hammered in her chest. "Your papa is going to take care of everything. We just need to stay quiet and wait." They huddled there in the dark, and time seemed to stretch and distort. Katherine could not tell if minutes or hours were passing. She heard more gunshots, heard horses thundering past the house, heard men yelling. Then, finally, silence. They waited. Katherine counted to 100, then did it again. The girls had gone quiet, pressed against her sides like frightened rabbits. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard footsteps above them, heavy boots on the kitchen floor. "Katherine, girls, where are you?" It was Cooper's voice, rough with fear and exhaustion. Katherine nearly sobbed with relief. "We are in the root cellar." The trapdoor opened, and Cooper's face appeared, illuminated by the lamp he carried. His face was smudged with dirt, and there was blood on his shirt, though Katherine could not tell if it was his. The girls scrambled up the ladder and threw themselves at him, and he caught them with his free arm, holding them tight. Katherine climbed up more slowly, her legs shaky. When she reached the kitchen, Cooper reached out and pulled her against him too, one arm around his daughter's and one around her, the lamp dangling from his hand. "Are you hurt?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. "It is not my blood," he said. "One of the rustlers. We caught them trying to cut out a section of the herd. There was a scuffle, but no one was seriously hurt. They ran off, and we got all the cattle back." "Thank God," Katherine breathed. Cooper looked down at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. His arm was still around her waist, and she was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the heat of his body and the way his eyes seemed to see right through her. "You did good," he said quietly. "Getting the girls to safety, thank you." "I would never let anything happen to them," Katherine said. "I know," Cooper said, and there was something in his voice that made it sound like more than just gratitude. "I trust you." The moment hung between them, charged with something Katherine was afraid to name. Then Emma shifted, breaking the spell, and Cooper stepped back. "Let me get you all settled back in bed. It has been a long night." After the rustler incident, something shifted between Katherine and Cooper. He started seeking her out more, staying to talk after the girls went to bed, asking her opinion on household matters and ranch decisions. He smiled more, laughed at her dry observations about life on the ranch. He started calling her Katherine instead of Miss Dawson, the informal address feeling intimate despite the single word. Katherine tried not to read too much into it. He was simply becoming more comfortable with her, trusting her more. That was natural after months of her proving herself. It did not mean anything beyond respect and appreciation for a job well done. But then there were the moments that felt like more. The time their hands brushed while doing dishes and he did not pull away immediately. The way he looked at her across the dinner table, his gaze lingering just a beat too long. The evening he came in from the fields and found her singing to the girls, and she caught an expression on his face that was almost longing. The girls, of course, noticed. They had never quite given up on their plan to make Katherine their mother, though they had at least stopped announcing it quite so openly. Instead, they engaged in less subtle forms of matchmaking. They constantly found excuses for Katherine and Cooper to be alone together. They talked up Katherine's virtues to their father and mentioned how handsome and strong he was when Katherine was in earshot. "You two are about as subtle as a stampede," Katherine told them one afternoon, having caught them not so accidentally locking her and Cooper in the barn together. "We do not know what you mean," Lily said innocently, though her grin was pure mischief. Despite herself, Katherine found it endearing. And if she was honest, she appreciated their efforts, even if she knew they were ultimately futile. Cooper had made it clear she was the housekeeper. He had loved his wife deeply, and Katherine could not imagine that he would be interested in the scandalous woman who cared for his children. Summer turned to fall, and the work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter. Katherine learned to preserve vegetables, to make preserves, to cure meat. She sewed warmer clothes for the girls, let down hems as they seemed to grow daily. The house, which had been dusty and neglected when she arrived, now gleamed with care. The windows sparkled, the floors shone, and there were always fresh flowers on the table when they were in season. She had made the ranch house a home, and she had never been happier in her life, even with the uncertainty that hung over her heart. One October evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Katherine was sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The air was cool and crisp, smelling of wood smoke and dying grass. She heard the door open behind her and Cooper came out, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Of course not," Katherine said, accepting the coffee gratefully. He settled into the chair beside her, stretching out his long legs with a sigh. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. "I have been meaning to talk to you," Cooper said finally, and something in his tone made Katherine's heart start to race. "About something the girls said." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "Cooper, whatever they said, I promise I did not encourage them. They have their own ideas about things." "I know," he said, "but the thing is they are not entirely wrong." Katherine turned to look at him, hardly daring to breathe. "What do you mean?" He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "I mean that over the past few months I have come to admire you greatly, Katherine. You are smart and capable and kind. You are wonderful with the girls, and you have made this house feel like a home again. And I find myself thinking about you far more than is probably appropriate for an employer." "Oh," Katherine breathed, unable to form any more coherent response. "I know you came here just looking for a job," Cooper continued. "And I know that your past makes you cautious about trusting people, about opening yourself up to judgment. But I need you to know that I do not care about the gossip or the accusations. I have seen who you are these past months, and that is what matters to me." "Cooper," Katherine said, and her voice shook slightly, "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now," he said. "I just needed you to know how I feel. Because if there is any possibility that you might feel the same way, then I would like permission to court you properly, to see if what I think might be growing between us is real." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You want to court me? Truly?" "Truly," he said, and now he reached over and took her hand. "Unless the idea is abhorrent to you, in which case I will apologize and we will never speak of it again." "It is not abhorrent," Katherine said quickly. "It is quite the opposite, actually. I have been fighting my feelings for you for months now, telling myself it was foolish, that you would never see me as anything more than an employee." Cooper's face broke into a wide smile, the first truly unguarded expression she had seen from him. "Then we have both been foolish." He stood and drew her to her feet, his hands warm and steady around hers. "Katherine Dawson, may I have permission to court you?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Cooper Patterson, you may." He pulled her close, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But instead, he just wrapped his arms around her and held her, solid and warm in the cool evening air. Katherine rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, and felt something she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. She felt safe. She felt wanted. She felt like she had finally come home. The next morning, the girls could barely contain their excitement when they came down to breakfast, and saw their father and Katherine sitting closer together than usual, hands almost touching on the table. Did something happen? Lily asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. It might have, Cooper said, fighting a smile. How would you two feel if I were to court Miss Dawson? The girls exploded in shrieks of joy, jumping up and down and hugging each other and then running to hug Katherine and their father. Emma was crying happy tears and Lily was laughing, and Katherine found herself swept up in their joy. Does this mean you will be our mother? Emma asked, pulling back to look at Katherine with shining eyes. It means your father and I are going to spend time together and see if we are well suited, Katherine explained gently. But yes, if things go well, that might be where this leads. Things will go well, Lily said with absolute certainty. We know they will. This is exactly what we wished for. Over the next few weeks, Katherine and Cooper navigated the strange waters of courtship while living in the same house. It was unconventional, certainly, but so was everything about their situation. They took walks in the evenings after the girls went to bed, talking for hours about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. They sat together on the porch on Sunday afternoons, watching the clouds roll over the mountains. They worked side by side in the kitchen, and more than once Katherine caught herself just watching him, marveling that this strong, good man wanted her. Cooper was courting her with old-fashioned determination. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He fixed the squeaky board in her bedroom floor without being asked. He listened when she talked about her life in the orphanage, her loneliness, her desperate desire to be more than just a charity case. And he shared his own stories of loss and grief, of how hard it had been to lose his wife, of how he had wondered if he would ever feel whole again. "You make me feel alive," he told her one evening as they stood by the corral watching the sunset. "I did not realize how numb I had become until you arrived, and suddenly everything felt vivid again." "You make me feel safe," Katherine replied. "Not just physically, though that too, but safe to be myself, to be honest about my feelings, to stop always being on guard." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You never have to be on guard with me. I will always protect you, Katherine. Always." The first time he kissed her, it was late November and the first snow of the season was falling softly outside. They were in the kitchen, Katherine rolling out pie dough while Cooper sat at the table ostensibly reading the newspaper but actually just watching her. She looked over and caught him staring, and something about the expression on his face made her set down the rolling pin. "What is it?" she asked. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it might be too soon to say so, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Katherine Dawson." Katherine felt her breath catch, felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you for months, but I was too afraid to admit it." He stood and crossed to her, and this time when he pulled her close, he did not hesitate. He kissed her softly, sweetly, and Katherine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. His lips were warm and gentle, and he kissed her like she was precious, like she was worth cherishing. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I want to marry you," Cooper said. "I know we should probably wait longer, be more conventional about this, but I am not a man who waits when he knows what he wants. Will you marry me, Katherine?" "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course I will marry you." They were married just before Christmas in the small church in Sonora, with the girls standing up beside them and half the town in attendance. Katherine had worried that people would object, that someone would bring up the old accusations, but Cooper had made it clear that anyone who did would no longer be welcome at the ranch. And besides, over the months Katherine had lived there, she had slowly won over many of the townspeople through her work at church socials and her kindness to anyone who would give her a chance. Mrs. Miller from the boarding house cried happy tears. The ranch hands, who had come to respect Katherine for her hard work and kindness, whistled and clapped. And the girls stood beside Katherine in new dresses she had sewn for them, looking like they might burst from joy. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cooper kissed her in front of everyone, and Katherine heard Emma whisper loudly to Lily, "I told you it would work out." They had a simple reception at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and a fiddler playing music. Katherine danced with her new husband with the girls, with some of the braver ranch hands. She felt like she was floating, like none of this could possibly be real. That night, after the guests had left and the girls were tucked into bed, Cooper carried Katherine over the threshold of his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine said honestly. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never be able to escape the accusations, never find peace or acceptance. And now I am here, married to the most wonderful man with 2 beautiful daughters and a home. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Cooper said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "It is real and it is forever. I promise you, Katherine, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice." "I could never regret this," she said. "You and the girls are the best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Katherine lost herself in the warmth and safety of his embrace. Later, wrapped in his arms in the darkness, she thought about the long journey that had brought her here. All the pain and fear and loneliness had led to this moment, to this man, to this family. It had been worth it. Every single moment had been worth it. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Katherine settled into her role as wife and mother with ease, finding that it fit her far better than just being the housekeeper. The girls started calling her Mama, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence. Cooper was an attentive and loving husband, always making sure she knew she was valued and cherished. In the spring, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. When she told Cooper, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. The girls were ecstatic, already planning all the things they would teach their new sibling. "I hope it is a boy," Emma said. "We need more boys around here." "I hope it is a girl," Lily countered. "Then we will have 3 daughters and Papa will be hopelessly outnumbered." "I do not care either way," Cooper said, pulling Katherine close. "As long as both mother and baby are healthy, that is all that matters." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Katherine bloomed under Cooper's devoted care. He insisted she not work too hard, took over many of her chores, and made sure she rested. The girls helped too, taking on more responsibilities without complaint. In late October, almost exactly a year after Cooper had first told Katherine he loved her, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel after Cooper's father, and when Cooper placed the tiny bundle in Katherine's arms, she cried with joy. "He is perfect," she whispered, looking down at the small face, the tiny fingers that wrapped around hers. "He has your nose," Cooper said, sitting beside her on the bed. "And your stubborn chin," Katherine laughed. The girls crowded around, wanting to see their new brother. "He is so small," Emma breathed. "Can I hold him?" Katherine carefully transferred the baby to Emma's arms, showing her how to support his head. Lily stood close, one hand on her sister's shoulder, both of them gazing at Samuel with wonder. "We are a real family now," Lily said softly. "A whole, complete family." "We were a real family before," Cooper said. "But yes, now we are a bigger family." As Katherine watched her husband and children gathered around her new son, she felt a sense of peace and completeness that she had never imagined possible. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, desperate and alone, willing to take a job no one else would accept. That woman could never have imagined this ending, could never have believed that such happiness was possible. But it was possible. She was living proof of that. Sometimes the hardest journeys led to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes the jobs no one else wanted turned out to be exactly what you needed. Sometimes the man who hired you as a housekeeper turned into the love of your life. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranch life was hard work, and there were dry seasons and harsh winters and all the challenges that came with raising children and running a business. But through it all, Katherine and Cooper faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. They had 2 more children, another boy named Robert and then a daughter they named Sarah, after Cooper's first wife. Lily and Emma never resented their stepmother for honoring the woman who had come before her. Instead, they appreciated Katherine's grace in acknowledging that their father had loved before and could love again, that the human heart was big enough for all of it. Lily grew into a talented artist, eventually moving to Denver to study formally, but always returning home to the ranch for holidays. Emma became a teacher, starting a school in Sonora and teaching the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. Samuel took over the ranch when Cooper decided to retire, proving to have inherited his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business. Robert became a doctor, and little Sarah grew up to be a writer, penning stories about life in the West that were published in magazines back east. Katherine and Cooper grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the land they loved. They spent their evenings on the porch they had sat on that first night when Cooper confessed his feelings, watching sunsets and holding hands and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this point. "You ever regret it?" Cooper asked her one evening when they were both in their 60s, their children grown and starting families of their own. Taking that job that no one else wanted, staying when you could have left. Katherine turned to look at him, at the man who had been her husband for over 30 years, the father of her children, her partner in every sense of the word. "Not for a single moment," she said. "That was the best decision I ever made." "Mine too," Cooper said, leaning over to kiss her. "Hiring you was the smartest thing I ever did." "The girls might argue that they hired me," Katherine said with a laugh. "True," Cooper agreed. "They did insist that you be their mother. I suppose we owe them everything." "We do," Katherine agreed. "They saw what we could not see yet. They knew we belonged together before we did." Cooper squeezed her hand. "To think I almost did not hire you. I almost let fear and prejudice guide my decision. Thank God I was smart enough to give you a chance." "Thank God indeed," Katherine said softly. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Katherine reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had been accused of murder, shunned by society, desperate and alone. And yet, all of that had led her to Cooper, to the girls, to this life that she loved more than anything. The job no one else would take had given her everything she had ever wanted. The ranchers' daughters who insisted she be their mother had given her a family. And the man who had been willing to look past gossip and give her a chance had given her a love that would last a lifetime. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. It was everything. Years later, when Katherine Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, the entire town of Sonora turned out for her funeral. The church was packed with people whose lives she had touched, children she had helped raise, families she had welcomed into her home. Her children and grandchildren stood together, holding each other up through their grief, remembering a woman who had taught them about resilience and kindness and the power of love. Cooper, now 85 and frail but still sharp-minded, stood at the graveside and spoke about his wife. "Katherine was the bravest person I ever knew," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She faced prejudice and fear, and she never let it break her. She turned a job that no one else wanted into a life that was rich beyond measure. She loved fiercely and completely, and she made everyone around her better. I was blessed beyond words to call her my wife, and I will love her until my last breath and beyond." He lived only 6 months more, and when he died, he was buried beside Katherine on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. On the shared headstone, their children had inscribed, "Cooper Patterson and Katherine Patterson, beloved parents and grandparents together in life, and in death love conquers all." And on that ranch, in that house that Katherine had turned from a dusty bachelor residence into a warm and welcoming home, her legacy lived on. Her children raised their own children there, teaching them the same lessons Katherine had taught them. They told stories about the grandmother who had come to the ranch as a desperate woman seeking any job she could find, and had stayed to build a family and a life that touched generations. The story of the rancher's daughters who insisted on the woman no one else would hire became family legend, passed down through the years. It was a story about faith and second chances, about the wisdom of children and the courage of a woman who refused to give up. It was a story about love conquering prejudice, about family being more than blood, about home being where the heart finds peace. And long after everyone who had known Katherine was gone, the story remained. Because some loves are so powerful, so transformative, that they echo through time, reminding us all that sometimes the best things in life come from the chances we almost did not take, the jobs we almost did not accept, the people we almost passed by. Katherine Dawson Patterson had been a woman accused, a woman shunned, a woman with nowhere else to turn. But she had also been a woman of courage and grace, a woman who turned desperation into determination, who transformed rejection into redemption. She had accepted a job no one else would take, and in doing so, she had found everything she had ever wanted. She had found her home. She had found her family. She had found her love, and in the end, that was all that mattered.